Okay. Vamos nós. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah, Daf, Lamed, Daled. We began on the Mishnah and Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, the Sugya of the Arava. And as we will learn, the willow branch or the willow stem that's called Arava, as we'll learn today, the three specific simonim that will define whether we are indeed taking the Arava, that is what's valid. But similar branches, similar growths, stems that are called in the times of the Mishnah Tzaf Tzafa, even though they come from the family of Aravas, they are dafka not valid. And the Gemara very importantly points out, not only concerning Arava, Tzaf Tzafa, but various other items that are normally needed and they are connected to halachas, that after a certain period of time, whether it was the Churban Beis HaMikdash or whether it was because of other historical moments, people started to change the words like Arava, Tzaf Tzafa. At a certain point, what was originally called Arava was called Tzaf Tzafa. What was originally called Tzaf Tzafa was called Arava. And that is important to know, because when people learn the halachas, but they don't match it with reality, so they know, yeah, Arava is good, Tzaf Tzafa is not. But when you actually pick up a branch, you have to know whether this is the Arava or whether that is the Tzaf Tzafa, and to be mindful of the fact that certain words were switched around at a certain point. Now, in Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis, we're going to learn two Mishnayos. The first will be how many of the four species need to be taken. And on the second Mishnah, we're going to have, by the way, there's going to be a very important machlokes between the Rabbeinu Tam and the halachis gedolos in the understanding of our Gemara, of whether you need to hold the four at the same time, or whether they only have to be in front of you at the same time, and you can even fulfill the obligation by picking up one by itself. Obviously, as we'll learn in our sugya, that all four species are essential one to the other. That means if you only have three, even if you pick them up, you're not going to be yoitza. You have to have the four. But again, the question is, do you need to pick them up at the same time, which is the way we do it, or not? Now, even though we keep on learning the Shita Rebbe Yehuda that lulav needs eged, we don't paskin that way. Even though we do it nonetheless, but they certainly need not be bound together. But we're going to be machmer, as we'll speak out, and we dafka pick them up all at the same time. The second Mishnah on Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis will speak all about the esrog. Up until now, we spoke about the lulav, the hadas, and the arava. And not only will we have, again, the symmetry of the various halachas that we learned up until now regarding the other three, how they also are the same regarding the esrog, but being that the esrog is a fruit or it's a food item, so there's going to be new, unique halachas that were not relevant until now, like an esrog of orla. Orla is something that's only shaykh to a food item that the Mishnah will have to speak out concerning the esrog, as far as other types of physical blemishes, which are also unique concerning the esrog. And if we'll have time, we'll begin at least the sugya and Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Again, this is all similar one to the other, that in as much as the Ritva points out, that we know what are the Arbas Haminim. We know what are the four species because we're simply doing what our fathers did, what their fathers did, going back to Moshe. But it's important in the Gemara to find if there is a source in Psukim that at least are merames, that when the Torah here in our sugya says Pri Eitz Adar, which literally means a fruit from a beautiful tree, how do we know, or is there at least an indication that this is dafka referring to the esrog and chevra and a lot more? Let us start on the Daf Lamed Daled Amid Aleph. We left off 5 lines from the top of the Amid, right? Tanu Rabban. We learned in a brisa. We learn in a brisa. Arvei Nachal. This is quoting the words that we have in the pasuk in Emor, literally meaning brook, willows. And as we learned yesterday, right? One might have thought, as indeed do some Tanoim, that what aravos are good, dafke, not only if they are of the species that's called arvei nachal, but they have to actually grow by a nachal. So this brisa says, hagedei lois al hanachal, they have to grow on a brook. And here there's a machlokes how to understand this Tana amongst the Rishonim. Is this Tana saying that it has to physically grow on the brook? Or as it's more mashma, it's the species that generally grow on water. And that comes to exclude, says the Braisa, to something that's in the general family of Aravis, but they were called a while back Tzaf-Tzafa. And the Tzaf-Tzafa species generally grow in the mountains. And as we spoke out in the Mishnah, that the leaves of the Tzaf-Tzafa are round and not elongated, they're not long. But more than that, we're going to learn today the three simanim, and we'll get to that in a moment. Now, Amar Rab Zera Maikra, right, where do we find in a pasuk that a Tzaf-Tzafa, even though it belongs to the general family of Aravos, are not valid to be taken for the mitzvah? So we're quoting a pasuk in Yecheskel, and here Hashem is reprimanding the Jewish people through Yecheskel. This pasuk is giving as a mashal that which the nimshal will be the Jewish people, that kach al mayim rabim, he took that which grows on abundant waters, and that is referring to Aravos. And we're going to understand, and what happened, instead of taking the superior Tzaf-Tzafa Samoi, that he set it up as a Tzaf-Tzafa. He exchanged the Arava for a Tzaf-Tzafa, and these are words of reprimand. So you see that even though Tzaf-Tzafa does come from the general family of Aravos, it's considered something inferior, and that's why we're being criticized for why do we go from something superior to something inferior. Amar le Abaye, that how does the Braisa to he asked Rab Zera, how did you prove it from the pasuk? Maybe parush or kumafarish. Maybe the pasuk is not saying that we exchanged something greater for something worse. Maybe fakert, the Torah is saying, the pasuk is saying, kach al mayim rabim, take that which grows on abundant waters, and adarabah, and that even also includes umayninu, that's a perush, that's Tzaf-Tzafa. Fakert, maybe that pasuk should be a raya that a Tzaf-Tzafa is also good enough for the mitzvah of arava. So the Gemara says, so Rab Zera answers, no. If that would be the interpretation, then the last word in the pasuk, samoi, right, he has taken, doesn't fit. He has set it up. Not if without the word, it should have been that kach al mayim rabim. That should have been the whole pasuk, and Tzaf-Tzafa. Kach al mayim Tzaf-Tzafa. Samoi means no. That he said it. He exchanged it for a Tzaf-Tzafa. And what does that mean? Indeed, Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani yomarti shiur Yisrael lefanai. I wanted for the Yidden to be in my eyes like kekach al mayim rabim, like that which is taken from abundant waters. We should have been something superior. And what is that? Arava. However, indeed, veheim samoy atzman, right? They set themselves, they went down a step, Tzaf-Tzafa, like the inferior type of aravis that's called Tzaf-Tzafa, that generally grows in the mountains and not on waters. Now, others had that same Tanu Rabbanon, but instead of having an Amoira, in our case, Rab Zera, who to back up the Braisa found a pasuk, some people learned that the Braisa, the Tana itself, the Tana himself already brought the pasuk. The Braisa quoted the pasuk. Kachal Maim Rabim, Tzaf-Tzafa Samoy. And Adarabah, it was Rab Zera that then asked on the Braisa, how do you know that he exchanged that which is taken al mayim rabim, which would be the arava, for a Tzaf-Tzafa? Maybe perusha komafarish. Maybe the pasuk is actually explaining itself that what is that which is taken from mayim rabim that also or even includes Tzaf-Tzafa. And Rab Zera himself answered, because if that would have been the meaning of the pasuk in Yecheskel, then the last word simply doesn't fit. Imkein mai samoy. In other words, here again, Amar Ababo, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani Yomarti shiur Yisrael lefanai kekach al mayim rabim. Kama, And now we have to insert, and what is that which is taken from a lot of waters? That's the arava, something superior. Now we all are familiar, and we'll speak a little bit more at Amid Beis, with the many midrashim that every rabbi darshans over Yom Tov, so many days of Yom Tov, a lot of drashas, a lot of midrashim, how the four species are representations of four types of Yidden. And in most of these comparisons, the arava from the four species is the one that's the most inferior. That when we make the bundle, the Hoshana, we just mentioned that a few days ago, our meaning is to make an effort that the arava should be hidden, not a tam and not a reyach. Just to point out the amazing pasuk over here, that when Yecheskel is telling us how God wanted to view us, God wanted us to be like an arava. The problem is that we became a tzavtzafa, which is gavaldik. Al pishita is the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, that there's nothing greater than a ish pashut, than a Jew that's plain. That's not a derogatory statement, but that's actually a complimentary statement. And halavai, even when people, and we all should grow in our avodas Hashem, and we should grow in our Torah knowledge, and we should grow in our observance and hiddur and mitzvahs. But halavai, we should remain pashut. We should remain humble. We should remain like the arava, and that will be the biggest compliment. Here we have a brisa that's now going to give us the signs to know which one is the actual willow that has to be taken, and what is the one that maybe is from it's from the family of willows, but it's not kosher for the arba saminim. So here are the three simanim. Arava, number one, kana shala odoim. The stem is red. You know, guys, we are familiar with our aravis. Doesn't mean red, but there's a reddish tinge in the stem. Number two, va'ole shala mashuch. The leaf is elongated. As we learned before, like a nachal. That's the meaning of nachal. Not that it has to mamish the way we're learning, grow on the nachal, but it has to be, narrow and long. And sign number three, upi achalok. The edge of the leaves has to be smooth. Oh, now what is the tzavtzafa? Says the brisa, chana shala lavan. Its stem is white. Again, not white, but instead of it having this red tinge, it has a whitish tinge. Number two, va'ale shala agul. Oh, that the leaves are round. That's what we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah yesterday. And number three, upia doima lamago. And the edges of its leaves are serrated like a sickle. Now, guys, if you're going to look at your aravas, many of them have a certain type of, if the word is serratation, where's Danny Fishman, with a little bit of a zigzag. And as we'll see in a moment, if only this siman is there, it's still going to be kosher. In fact, the Gemara, but did we not learn in a brisa that indeed regarding the smoothness or regarding the edgedness of the leaves, if it's doima lamagal, it's kosher. If it's like a sickle, it's actually good. It's only if doima lamasar, only if it's like a saw, is it invalid. Now, many Rishonim explain that magol, or sickle, means that there's this pointiness. Or let's speak about the teeth. They call them teeth. That the teeth of the leaves are all facing only in one direction, and it's facing backwards towards the handle. That is what's still okay. When does the protrusions invalidate that type of arava? If the teeth are facing in both directions. Let's see, Kevin already is figuring out. So, all right, that's a sickle, but if you would actually picture in your mind your aravas, you'll notice that even if there's a little bit of this, if it's serrated, it's only serrated in one direction. And that's actually okay. The problem is that here the Bryce is saying that doivel is kosher. And we are learning that one of the signs of the tzavtzafa, it says in the prior brisa, is that pia doima lamagul, meaning it's not good. So answers the Gemara Amar Abaye Kitanya Hahi, the latter brisa that okays, even though the aravos and the leaf are not completely smooth, but they are serrated like a sickle. That's bechilfa gila. Guys, chilfa is a name that was used in the times of Chazal for aravos. So there was a unique type, there was a certain type of chilfa that was called chilfa gila, that it had two of the simanim of the arava that we mentioned, that the stem was reddish and the leaves are elongated. Eloma, the third one, it didn't have, it wasn't perfectly smooth. It was not, didn't have teeth that were pointing in both directions. It only had teeth pointing in one direction, serrated like a magal, and that's taka okay. And that's taka okay. So it's important to know that, because there are sometimes, I remember in Brazil, the aravis over there, they were not perfectly smooth. And everyone used them. Everyone used them because that's exactly this chilfa gila. It's from the family of aravis and not from the family of tzavtzav. Now the Abaya, now that we have a Braisa, now the Braisa never mentioned chilfa gila, which is actually the name that was used in that time, the time of Abaya. He just says that the Braisa must be referring to a chilfa gila, and Shema Mino, hi chilfa gila, that now amongst us, when you go to the market and you ask them for a chilfa gila, chilfa means an arava, gila is the name of that type, kosher lo haishayim. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, pshita. Braisa says that. So the Gemara says, no. The Braisa did not say chilfa gila. Abaya is linking the Braisa to what he knew as chilfa gila, and that's a chiddush, because Mal the Tema, one might have thought that chilfa gila is actually not okay. By the fact that people in the times of Abaya called chilfa means arava, they gave a secondary name, a shem levai, to the arava. Many times when we have to pick something that has a name, if it has also a accompanying name, it's dafka not okay. That's what Abai wants to emphasize, that even though people call the chilfa gila, not chilfa, which means arava, but chilfa gila, it's still okay. And taka why? So the answer is, it says arvei nachal, and as we learned, arvei is lashon rabin. And as we learned in the end of Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, as we learned out yesterday, it comes to include more than one species. In our context, the Torah is being marames that even if you have an arava that has a shem levoi, that has a accompanying name, it's also okay as long as it meets right the first two simanim, that the stem is reddish and the leaves are elongated. And even regarding the third siman, even if it's not perfectly smooth, if the edges of the leaves are not perfectly smooth, they're not going to be TV like a saw. They're only going to be TV like a sickle. They won't have teeth pointing in both directions, only in one direction. Right. Amar Rav Chizda. Hani Tlas Mili. The following three things, Ishtani, Shamayu, their names changed from when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Number one is Chalafta and Arafta. These are two names. It's amazing. That original, and Arafta Chalafta, was originally Arafta was the Arava. They used to call Tzavtzafa Chalafta. So B'zman Beis HaMikdash Kaim, if someone went to the market and he says, can I have a Chalafta? Can you use a Chalafta for the little? They would say, absolutely not. After the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, for whatever reason, the kosher Arava is called Chilfa or Chalafta. The word arava was used for tzavtzafa, and that's the ma'inaf kamina lulav. So if you are familiar with the actual item, as we all should be, no one should be afraid of you confusing it. If it's not going to look like the one your father took, you're not going to take it. But if you're simply buying it based on its name, so there was a name change. The next item that had a name change, shipoida, which is a shofar, and chatzoit sarta, a trumpet. Okay, so you know what a shofar looks like. But if someone never saw a shofar, so before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the shofar is what we call a shofar, and everything else was called a trumpet. It's amazing that after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the name given to the shofar was trumpet. Chatzot Satra, Shipura, and Ma'inaf Gemina, l'shofar shel Rosh Hashanah, that you must use what we call a shofar. But what was called in Babylonia after the temple was destroyed, they would call that a chatzot sarta. And the chatzot sarta is what needs to be taken. And what the oilam, what the people would call the shofar, is dafka what may not be taken. And the third item is pasha, the name of a table. Now you have a large table and a small table. There was psoirta, psoira, psoira, psoirta. Before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the large table was called Psoira, And the small table, they added a little tough, right? Like in Yiddish, avrem eleh, psoirta. Psoirta means the little one. After the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, for whatever reason, they actually called the large table psoirta and the small table psoira. And now, l'mayin afkemina over here, l'mekachu memkar. If there was a sale that happened, and the seller says, I'm selling you a psoira, and then he delivers a little table. And the buyer says, no, psoira, we made up, you're going to sell me a psoira. So since the people after the Churban Beis HaMikdash began to call the small table psoira, they flipped it. So that is what was explicitly spoken out on the sale, and the sale will be standing. Amar Abaye, similarly, right, the followings did not necessarily change connected to the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, but there are certain items whose names were flipped around. Af ani oimer, beikase, huvlila, and huvlila beikase. Guys, if you remember in Chulin, when we spoke about the 4 stomachs that a kosher animal has, stomach number 2, right, is called beis hakoisos. Originally in Aramaic, it was called beikase. The 3rd stomach, that's called hemses, right, originally was called huvlila. And then at a certain time, the opposite names were given. And why do we have to be aware of that? So if you remember when we learned this section of treifos, certain defects in an animal render the animal treif, even though the shechita was okay, the animal may not be consumed. So we also learn details that both when it comes to the stomach number 2 and when it comes to stomach number 3, if they are perforated, they become treif. However, when it comes to the beis hakoisos, since the beis hakoisos has like a thick, a double layered muscle or skin, even if a needle is stuck inside one side, it only renders it treif if it's visible from both sides. That we found that by other parts of the animal as well. Masha'enkein, the stomach of hemses is a much thinner layered stomach. The skin or the muscle is much thinner, and if there is a puncture in it, even if the needle is not seen through the other side, it's also going to become treif. So therefore, Pashat, you have to remember that it could have been that originally, the problem is, it's the beis hakoisos is harder to tarf. But which one of the 2 stomachs is the beis hakoisos? So they used to call the beis hakoisos at some time in the past beikase, but now they call it hemses. So if someone asks a Rav, that there was a needle stuck in the hemses, but it didn't go out the other side, now that the huvlila, and they said that's the huvlila, it went in the huvlila. The huvlila later is taka referring to the beis hakoisos, and you can pass on that the animal is okay. And Amar Rava Bar Yosef, the final item that underwent a name change, this is actually a location, Afanei Omer, that originally Bavel was Bavel and Bursif was Bursif. Right? And after a certain while, what used to be called Bavel is called Bursif. The location, what used to be called Bursif, is now called Bavel. And Lamay Nafkemina, Daf Lamed Dalid Amid Beis. So let's have our opportunity to review the beginning, the opening of Masechtas Gittin. Let's learn Nash. The Gittin Nashim, the Kaim Alon, we learned in Gittin Daf Beis, Hamevi get Mechutz La'aretz. If someone brings a get from Chutz La'aretz and delivers it to a woman that lives in Eretz Yisrael, so Chazal made an enactment that the shliach must say, obviously, if it's true, befanei nechtav, in front of me the get was written, and ubefanei nechtam, in front of me the get was signed. And we gave 2 reasons for that takana. Number 1, mishum the ein mitzuin lekaimai, since the people, the travel between Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael was not that common. And as the Gemara clarifies that if the husband at a time later will claim that the entire divorce document was forged, when such a claim is made, then you need to authenticate the signatories. You have to notarize it. So notarizing the signatories, we're going to learn many times that there are 3 different ways of doing it. All of them become very difficult if the travel And therefore, the familiarity between the people in one location regarding who are the people in the original location, whether knowing the person or knowing to identify their signature or having documents that we already have here that from which we can match their chasima to that chasima, all of that is not that common. So to prevent the husband's claim it's forged to have an effect from the outset, the shliach says, that's reason number one. Reason number two, the third line in top of Nashi, the aim became lishma. In other words, not everyone in Chutz La'aretz was familiar with the halacha that all of the get has to be written, right, for the man, for the wife, or for the ex-wife to be, and l'shem gittin. Now, b'fani nechtam doesn't address the lishma, but it opens up a conversation. Once the shliach says b'fani nechtam, then you're right. That's what the Gemara says. Then Beis Din can have a follow-up question. You saw it written. You saw it. Did they sign it lishma? So both of these reasons are not negeya Bavel, the original Bavel, because both people were learned in Bavel. They knew the din of lishma. In just between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, there were constantly people traveling back and forth. So just like if a shliach brought a get from one part of Eretz Yisrael to another part of Eretz Yisrael, the shliach did not have to say b'fani nechtam. Bavel and Eretz Yisrael had that same standard, had that same halach. They were exempted. They were not included in this additional takana. Now, the question is, where is Bavel? So you have to. So right now, when Rava Bar Yosef is saying that if someone in Eretz Yisrael is saying, "Oh, I brought my get from Bursif," Bursif now is what Bavel used to be. Bursif is the place where you have shayoros, mitzuyos, and the people are learned. And if someone nowadays will say, "Oh, I came from Bavel," now he'll have to say b'fani nechtam. We learned over there in Gittin that not because the names of the cities were changed, were flipped. Bavel, Bursif, Bavel. In other words, you have to know halachis. I think that's the general takeaway. And you have to also know what the name means in actuality. There's so many beautiful stories between great Rabbanim when they were younger, that when a woman came with the animal part and she showed him how there was a needle stuck in it, and so he learned, but he never saw an actual korkavan. He says, if this is a korkavan and that's a needle, then it's treif. So you have to have practical knowledge to know what the words mean. And if people decide to change names of items, you have to be updated with that. If not, you're going to apply the halacha in an actual wrong case. Okay. Chavra Mishnah on top of the Amud. This is a very important Mishnah. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, opinion number one. The question here is, what's the minimum amount of the arbas aminim required? And just to speak out that there's going to be, like always, big arguments between the Rishonim, whether this is only the minimum amount, but you may add, or whether you may not add. But let's begin. Rabbi Yishmael says, Hadassim have to be 3. What's the source of Rabbi Yishmael? We'll see in the Gemara, in a Brais. Shtei Aravis. Aravis is 2. Lulav 1 and Esrig 1. And this is some rabbinic sermons. So amongst the many metaphors or many representations, that's a better word, that the Arbas Haminim represent, is that you have eyes, you have body parts, and you have the mouth. So the Hadassim are connected to the eyes. And what shot we have 3 eyes? Well, we're not going into other cultures with the third eye. 3 eyes means, like it says in Pirkei Avos, that a person should always look at the past, ma'ayin ba'asa, on the present, where you're going, and in the future. That's the 3 eyes of the Hadassim. The Arava represents the lips, and we have 2 lips, the upper lip and the bottom lip. And the Lulav represents the spine, and the Esrik represents the heart. And we have, at least most of us should have, we should have a good spine, and we have 1 heart. Not 2 hearts. We should have 1 heart. We should be direct the heart always into God. Okay. Now, the continuation in the Mishnah is only regarding Hadassim. Regarding the statement that you need to have 3 Hadassim, afilu shnayim ketumim, even if 2 Hadassim are clipped, as long as 1 is not clipped, you're good to go. Now, before we speak out the big machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid, what does this clip refer to? Let's quickly read inside Rashi. Rashi points out, that which we will learn soon in the Gemara, that this statement contradicts the prior statement. Because miman avshach, If clipped invalidates the hadas, and Rabbi Shmuel says you need to have 3 hadasim, so why does he tolerate 2 that are clipped? He should demand all of 3 of them should be wholesome. If a clipped hadas, at least b'di'evet, is still okay, so why does he demand for 1 not to be clipped? Then all 3 can be clipped. Doesn't make sense. And therefore, he's quoting the Gemara. I know it doesn't fit into the words, but you should know that Rabbi Yishmael changed his mind. In the beginning, Rabbi Yishmael felt that you have to have 3. Rabbi Yishmael holds that clipped is not okay. And later, after Rabbi Yishmael came to the conclusion that 1 hadas is enough, Rabbi Yishmael says, you know what, 2 of them can be clipped. Only 1 should not be clipped. But here the question is, after Rabbi Yishmael changed his mind and he held that you only need to have 1, so why does he speak about the other 2 by saying that they can be clipped? You don't need them. So Mikan, many Rishonim learn concerning the hadasim only, that the number that the Mishnah gives, whether it's the original 3, Rabbi Yishmael, whether it is later Rabbi Yishmael changed his mind 1, it's only the minimum amount, but you can add to hadasim. And our minig, by the way, is that, we taka paskin that you need to have a minimum of 3 hadasim, but hadasim, unlike the aravos, unlike the lulav, unlike the esrog, here it's only the minimum amount. And actually, we consider it a hidur. I'm saying the minig Chabad to add to the hadasim. The Rebbe had 36 hadasim in his lulav. Okay, right. We'll see in the Gemara. So Rav Tarfon holds, number 1, you need to have 3. And that his statement will be even clearer in the Braisa and the Gemara. You need to have, not like Rabbi Shmuel, after he changed his mind that 1 is enough, you have to have 3. But Rav Tarfon holds that clipped is okay. Now, let me speak out right now. What is clipped? So when we learned in the prior Mishnayos and about the top being clipped off, so the Rambam understands that's taka what it means over here. That here we are introducing a new opinion, even though we learned above that if the top is clipped off, it's not okay. No, that it is okay. The Ravid clearly disagrees with very strong words that we know from a heavenly voice. He says in the yeshiva that if the top, that means if the stem of the hadasim are clipped in the top, it's not okay. What is okay over here is that it was common that from the hadasim, from a normal hadas, sometimes naturally there are branches, little branch-alach that come out from the hadas itself. And people didn't like it. They actually found the hadas to be more beautiful when it's just 1 stem. So that is the question, whether clipping off the little branches that come out of the center stem, people did it because, it was nicer, or maybe it was easier to hold together or to bind it together, whether that invalidates it or not. That is the debate over here. And according to the Ravid, if the top is clipped off, everyone holds that it's not kosher. Let's go by it. Rabbi Akiva oimer, kshem shululav echad ve'esrog echad, kach hadas echad va'arava achas. So you, Rab Tarfon, are saying that 3 are needed, but they are allowed to be clipped. Rabbi Akiva says, no, they may not be clipped, but Rabbi Akiva is lenient or more lenient than Rab Tarfon because Rabbi Akiva, like Rabbi Yishmael, after Chazar Boy holds, you only need to have 1 hadas. And now let's learn the Gemara sources for all of these Tanoim. Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Oimer. It says in Parshas Emor the words Pri Eitz Hadar, right? The fruit of a beautiful tree, the fruit of a hadar tree. The Torah uses the words pri, not peiros. Pri is lashon yachid, and from there we learn that the lulav indeed, that the esrog is echad, 1 esrog, and dafka 1, not only minimum 1, dafka 1, and not more. Kapois tamarim. To remember, we just learned that kapois is written without vavs, similar to the limud we had by Sukah. And that teaches you that even though kapais is in the plural, right? But if you focus on the mesoides, on the way it's written, not the way it's pronounced, it's 1. Kapais on avav, 1 lulav. Anaf eitz avos. Anaf eitz avos, the shoot of a plaited tree. 3 words. Anaf eitz avos, 3. That is the original sheet of Rabbi Yishmael. And arvei nachal, mamish consistent with the sugya we began today's daf with, arvei is lashon rabim. It comes to include, our Tana is saying not including more types, but you need to have more than one, plural, that aravais have to be dafke too. Now the continuation, like in the Mishnah, is only in reference to the hadasim. This is all Rabbi Yishmael. Now, even if two of the three hadasim are clipped, as long as ve'echad she'einoi katum, it's still good enough. Mamish like we had in the Mishnah, but here the words are a little bit different, but as we can see clearly, or clearer, more elaborate. Now that we already told you, now that we already read that Rashi, that Rabbi Shmuel later changed his mind. It's amazing how it was written. And the last clause was only one should not be clipped because you only need one. Rabbi Tarfon says shloisha. Look, compare this to the words in the Mishnah. It's a little bit different. No, you need three. Elamad, Rabbi Tarfon holds that it doesn't matter if it's clipped. Vafilu shloshta and arketumen. Rambam l'shitasoy and the Ravid and the others l'shitasam. Rabbi Akiva Omer, that which you, Rabbi Tarfon, say that you need to have three, I disagrey with it. Because Kashem Shalulad Echad and Esrig Echad, and no one debates that, Kach Hadas Echad and Arava Achas. But let's just add in between the lines, but the one Hadas, not like Rabbi Tarfon, who holds that Ketumim is a non-problem. Yes, it is a problem. The one has to be wholesome. Now, Amar, whether you have the word loy, even though, or others take out the word loy, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Yochol Yehei Esrig Imoam Ba'aguda Achas. Now he's speaking about another rule regarding the bundling. Now, we already learned yesterday, and we quoted already before that a few times, the Machlokes Tanoim, whether the lulav needs eged or not. But even according to the opinions, right, when we speak about bundling, the bundling is the lulav and the arav, hadasim and the aravos. That's the bundle. Whether it's a kesher shel kayama, whether it's stam bundle, the esrog is not part of the bundle. So you might think that, yeah, the esrog should be part of the same bundle. So to which Rabbi Eliezer responds, Amrat, logically, I'll show you it cannot be so. Why? Because v'chi nemar pri eitz hadar. And then is there a vav by the v'kapois tamarim? And like Rashi points out, that when it says v'anaf eitz avos, the Torah does add a vav. When the Torah speaks about the arvei nachal, it says the arvei nachal. There's a vav that connects. And so to be consistent, the Torah should have written v'kapois tamarim, but the Torah doesn't write a v'kapois tamarim. We don't link the lulav and subsequently the hadas and the arava with the first, with the pri eitz hadar. You know why? Because itaka should not be bundled together. And therefore, as we do it, that we bundle the lulav and the hadasim and the aravos, but the esrog is not in that bundle. Now continues the braiso uminayin shema akven ze'etzeh. How do you know that all four are essential? Meaning, if a person b'chlal doesn't have one of the four, do we say, well, at least take three? Which is what we say when it comes to tchelis and the tzitzis. If you don't have tchelis, at least wear the tzitzis. Or as we would say by the two pairs of tefillin, yad and roish, if you don't have the yad, at least put on the shol roish. Or if you don't have a yad, at least put on the shol roish. Do we say the same thing over here? No, we don't. They are all, if you don't have all four, then you're doing nothing by taking three. Even though we did learn above that if you're living at a time where you can't find an esrog, shloi tishtakach, not to forget, you take the three, you don't take the four, you don't add the pomegranate. But you don't make a bracha because you're not very good. You're not doing a mitzvah. How do you know that? Talmud Leimer, ulakachtem is really a drasha here, that we're dividing this word into two, that the lekicha, that the taking should be tama, from a tamim. It should be a complete, meaning all four. If you don't have all four, then you're not doing the mitzvah. Now, over here, keep your finger in the Gemara. We have a very important Tosfos. We spoke it out in the intro, Rabbeinu Tam and the Bahar. This is very important. So Tosfos writes 1 to the 4th Tosfos on the top of the Amid. Shetehei lekicha tama. So Tosfos brings from Menachos, from the Perek HaKoimetz Rabbah, and I'm quoting the words in the Gemara, that ma'akev when Chazal say the 4 species are ma'akiv, that means lo shanu elo she'ein lo. If you don't have one of the 4, then you're not going to do the mitzvah. They are essential. You have to have all of them. Avol yesh lo. These are the words of the Gemara. But if you have all 4, ein ma'akvin. If you have all 4, then they're not essential. What does that mean? What do you mean? If you have all 4, but you're not going to take them, what does that mean? So the halacha is gedoylois. He brings Tosfos down, says ein ma'akvin, meaning toloi tema adamagba lohu bahadi hadadi. We already established that the esrik is not part of the bundle. But what happens if you did not pick all 4 up at the same time? So let's take it. You have all 4. Let's add. They're in front of you. First, you pick up the bundle. Let's say, and then you would put it down, and then you pick up the esrik. You took all 4. Says the Bahag, that's good. That's the meaning of the Gemara. When the Gemara is saying that they are essential, but they're not essential, they are essential, meaning if you're never going to take all 4, you're not going to do the mitzvah. Or let's add, if you don't have them all in front of you at the same time, in front of you, you're not going to do the mitzvah. But if you had them all in front of you, says the Bahag, you don't have to hold them all together at the same time. You have to hold them all together, but not at the same time.
That's why we separate them.
We separate them because the Gemara just says that the Torah doesn't use the vav by vikapois. We don't put the esrik in the bundle. But as we know, we don't paskin like the Bahag. The Bahag is saying is that you don't even have to hold them together at the same time. I'm reading inside the Tosfos.
Rabbi, why did...
Don't say that when our Gemara says that they are ma'akiv, that means that if you don't pick them up at the same time, you don't get the mitzvah. No. If you picked up all 4, and again, many understand even in the Bahag, and they all have to be in front of you, but even if you didn't pick them up at the same time, shapir dami. And obviously, this is connected. We're not even speaking about the bundle. The Bahag reminds us that we don't pass them like Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, it's nice if you bundle it. We learned even lachachamim zekeli v'anveyu, bundle it, but you don't have to. So even if you mamish, you picked up the lulav, put it down. You picked up the hadas, put it down. Picked up the arava, put it down. Picked up the esrei. We're not even going into seder or in any other. Bahag is not speaking about the order. You fulfill the mitzvah. 1 second, didn't the Gemara over here say it's ma'akiv? Yeah, you have to have them in front of you. You have to pick all of them up, but you don't have to pick them up together. So holds the Bahag. And the Rabbeinu Tam, says absolutely not. Absolutely not. The Rabbeinu Tam says that lekicha tama means you have to pick them up at the same time. You have to hold them all together. And as we know, we paskin like this Rabbeinu Tam. So that's amazing. Let's go back.
Rabbi,
yes.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Just quickly here. Why does Rabbi Eliezer, from what did Rabbi Akiva say that, where did Rabbi Eliezer's question come where he says, Yachol Yesr Gimayim Baguda Achaz? What
that's
Rabbi
why,
Akiva
that's
say
why
that he
even
asked
though
the
in our
question?
Gemara you have Amar Loi, that's why in our Gemara, and I mentioned that many of the Rishonim didn't even have the girsa of Loi. Because if you have the word Loi tzvika, then the way we learned, then we're learning the whole thing wrong. Because indeed, the way we learned Rabbi Eliezer, which is the pshat, he's not speaking to Rabbi Akiva. He's speaking about a new topic. And take out the word Loi. So Stama, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, another din. Okay, let's go right. Now the Gemara, this is not the Baraisa. This is the Gemara. We spoke this out on the Rashi. Rabbi Yishmael, Niman Avshach, or Man Avshach. It doesn't fit. It's an inherent contradiction. Ish Shleiman Boyi, if he subscribes as he does, that one has to be unclipped. Okay, if you need to have Shleiman, Rabbi Yishmael says in the Mishnah and the Baraisa, you need to have 3. So then all 3 should have to be Shleiman. And Eloi Boy Shleiman, if he holds at least B'di'evet, even if it's clipped, however you understand clipped, it's okay. Afilu Chad Nami Loi doesn't work. So Amar Bira'o, in the name of Rav Ami, Chazar Boy Rabbi Yishmael. We have the rules that Mishnah Rishono Loizozim Im Kaima. That's the way we're going to word it. No, it's why. So why did the Rabbeinu HaKadosh quote Rabbi Yishmael saying 3 Adasim if he changed his mind? Because that's the way Torah Shemal Peh works. It was prior to his changing of mind. Everyone who learned Torah Shemal Peh would quote Rabbi Yishmael Omer Shleish Hadasim. Rabbi Yishmael Omer Shleish Hadasim. Even after he changed his mind, we don't take away those words. We just add this additionary clause that now with the Gemara it's clear. Indeed, Rabbi Yishmael changed his mind. Now, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, I want you to know that the halacha is like Rab Tarfon. What does Rab Tarfon say? Number one, you have to have 3 hadasim. That's the minimum. But Rab Tarfon holds that clipped is okay. They can be ketumen. And now the Gemara says, "Us the Shmuel time." You get it. Rav Yehuda is quoting Shmuel. Shmuel says, "Allah ki Rab Tarfon." Now I get it. It's going to fit. Shmuel once told those the mizabnei asa, those hadasim sellers, and don't think that the exorbitant pricing of the daled minim is a psachidish of our generation. The chiddush is that now you pay for the esrik. In the times of Shmuel, they got you by the hadasim. Doesn't matter on what, but you need all to have all 4. So everything was very affordable. The lost leader. And every year they would start hiking the prices of the hadasim. So Shmuel told them, listen, ashvu v'zabinu, straighten out your prices, which means keep it in check. Don't hike it the way you're doing it. And if you won't make the hadasim more affordable, then darshina luchu, I will darshan in public that halacha is like Rab Tarfon. And obviously people were trying to get unclipped hadasim. And he says, if I'm going to start saying the halachas like Rab Tarfon, people are gonna have a much easier time to find the hadasim, or I'm going to force the prices down. Right. Now, 1 second. So how does that prove? So 1 second. So all this is Shmuel the timing. Now, guys, I want you to know like this, that the emissaries, even if Shmuel would not paskin like Rab Tarfon, it would be okay for Shmuel to threaten the merchants. If you're not going to lower the price, I'll pass like Rab Tarfon, even if you never would do so. He's allowed to do that because people were being taken advantage of their religious practice. But we want to understand that Shmuel wasn't only threatening. Shmuel was saying the emes la'amitoy. And I'll prove it to you, my Tama, because if all he wanted to do was to give a threat, then he should have said something better. Guys, don't forget that Rab Tarfon says how many hadasim do you have to take? 3. If he wanted to threaten them, he could have said, I'm going to paskin like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said only 1. The leader should Rabbi Akiva. The Mekel, it's a bigger kula. The fact that Shmuel did not say so is a proof that in our case, Shmuel wasn't just threatening them. Shmuel was saying the emes. Very good. And that's the Oslo Shmuel time. Shmuel Taka, Rabbi Yehuda, Shmuel Laki Rabbi Tarfon. Says the Gemara, there's no proof. First of all, yeah, we believe Rav Yehuda, but there's no proof from that statement because maybe it was only a threat. But you know what? Rabbi Akiva's problem is, Rabbi Akiva Taka says you need to have 1, but Rabbi Akiva holds that the 1 has to be unclipped. That is where they got you. That people wanted to have it unclipped. Even today in the Sreigim, you can still buy a $50 esrog, which is already the cheap price. If it's going to be, all sorts of b'di'evadik, it's not so ideal. You want to have you're going to pay $180, $250, $1,000. There's no disguise the limit. So maybe it was only a threat. The reason why he didn't say like Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva demanded 1 that's unclipped. Rab Tarfon is allowing you to have clipped. Once you can get clipped, you can get 3, you can get 10, the prices would go down. Maybe to us, 3 clipped ones were easy to find and it would lower the prices. 1, that's Rabbi Akiva. But v'loy katum, loy shchiach. Bottom line is just to know that yes, Shmuel did indeed say that the halacha follows Rab Tarfon, which means that you need 3. And again, we understand that by the hadasim 3 is the minimum, not the maximum. 1 by the esrog is max, 1 and not more. 1, not more. 2 aravis and not more. Hadasim at least 3. And we also paskin that they are allowed to be clipped, and that's why the machlekes Rambam and Ravid is so important. That the Rambam understands it mamish, that even if the top of the stem is clipped, it's b'di'evet okay. And the Ravid is very, sometimes he uses very strong expressions against the Rambam, very famous expressions. He says that there was a heavenly voice that came in our Midrash that told us that you're wrong, Rambam. It doesn't mean the top that's clipped, we learned it in the prior Mishnah, and that's not good. Clip means, like we explained, that if you had a hadas that had little branches growing out of its stem and you wanted to clip that for you to have only 1 stem, that is something that is okay. Good. Beautiful. Chevra, that we have time, thank God. And let's begin now the final of the 4. Beautiful. The final, the esrog, the din of the esrog. It's an amazing note. there has to be a reason how the Seder in the Pasuk and the Seder of the Mishnah is clearly not the same, right? He begins with Lulav and the Hadas and the Arava. The last is the Dinim of the Esrog, the last one. And in the Pasuk that we keep on quoting, the Torah mentions first the pre-Eitz Hadar. And one of the for sure, this is said that we have this in the Gemara, that sometimes the order of the Rebbe is that which needs less expounding upon is mentioned first, and that which is more complex is left for later. And like we mentioned in the intro, since the esrog is also a pri, it's a fruit, which means it's a food, by default, that in itself will bring about many more halachas regarding the esrog, aside of a lot more concerning the beauty itself, concerning physical blemishes in the esrog, that we are most cautious for the esrog to be wholesome on a much higher standard than all of the other species. And let's start the Mishnah. Esrog hagazel, so far symmetric. If the esrog is stolen, or if the esrog is yavesh, not withered but fully dry, however that's defined in halacha, pasul, even after the fact. Shalasheda v'shalirani dachas, as we also learned in all of the three prior species, pasul. Now comes new dinim, dafke, because it's a food item. What happens if the esrog is from a orla tree? Now, Chevra, yes, we know that mitzvah is lav lehenlis nitma. We just learned about that. So to invalidate a esrog of orla, even though orla is asur bahana, that in itself doesn't invalidate the esrog. But as the Gemara will explain, there is a din of lochem. Yours, if we'll see this in the Gemara, if I cannot even have benefit from something, it's not fully mine, and therefore possible. Next thing, shall truma temeya. Now, guys, truma temeya is something that one is allowed to derive benefit from. What do we do with truma temeya? We burn it, lahasaka. We can use it for fuel. We can use it for light. So you would think, hold on, let me use it. It's also possible. Every clause, we'll leave it for the Gemara to explain. Shall truma tohira, what would be wrong with that? Right? It can be consumed. Says the Mishnah, well, here it's a lachatchila b'diavad. Lo yitel means lachatchila, don't take it. But v'im natal kasher, why not lachatchila? Again, we'll leave that for the Gemara. Next thing, what happens if the esrog is from the category of demai, which means that it was sold, it was bought from someone who was classified as a halachic am haaretz, and the items, the food items that one buys from the am haaretz has to be at least partially tithed again because of a doubt. So what is the din? Beishamai, poislin, ubeisilal machshirim. Again, we'll leave that for the Gemara. Now, what's amazing is that the Mishnah does not mention tevel. We'll speak that out in the Gemara. Even though the issue of the mai is that it might be tevel. Let's go right. Shal meiser sheni. It's meiser sheni, so it's yours. It was already separated as meiser sheni. So says the Mishnah, bi Yerushalayim lo yito. In Yerushalayim lachatchila, don't take it, but if you take it in Yerushalayim, then it's good. Says Rashi, we're learning Rashi, many Rishonim argue with this, that when is it b'di'evet good? Dafka only in Yerushalayim. Because since in Yerushalayim we are even allowed to eat it, so it's mamish yours, so you can fulfill the mitzvah. Avol chutz li Yerushalayim, I'm reading inside Rashi, loy. Even though you own it, but since God restricts your consumption, that here you may not eat it outside Yerushalayim, so the lochem ksiv. It's not called lochem. It's not called lochem because you cannot eat it. Back inside the Mishnah. Now we're going to go to physical defects or physical blemishes in the esrog. So number one, also chazozis. Chazozis means scabs. Chazozis means boils. It's not the beautiful ups and downs, hilly, mountainous look of an esrog. That's not what the chazozis is. Something that's unnatural, that's unbecoming. It's not pretty. So it depends. If this, let's call this boils. If these boils cover al rubai on the majority of the esrog, and this will be a problem of hidur, it won't be good. Number two, what happens if nitla pitmasa, if the pitim was removed? So if you have an esrog, so the top of the esrog, you have what protrudes and touches the fruit itself, and that's called the pitim or the dad. And above it, you have what's called the shoishanta, the flower. We're not speaking about a defect in the shoishanta. We're speaking about if the pitim was removed. This invalidation is worse than a hidur issue, even though we're not minimizing that if it's not hadar, it's not hadar, but still there's a certain amount of subjectivity when it comes to beauty. When there is a physical deficiency, being that the pitim is halachically considered part of the fruit, if the pitim was removed, then there's a part of the esrog that's missing, and even the minimum amount of esrog that's missing will render that esrog invalid. Now, we all are familiar that certain esrogim, to begin with, never have a pitim. That's machlal not a problem. That's not called deficient. Deficient means that if it grew with the pitim and then the pitim fell off, now you got yourself a problem of chassid. Next halacha, niklav. Niklav means that the outer peel of the esrog was removed. Now let's appreciate that there are many layers to everything, but specifically by the esrog, as we'll have time or in the beginning of tomorrow's shiur, that what's really unique about an esrog, let's say over a lemon, is that when you cut through a lemon, so yes, you have the skinny outermost peel that actually gives a shine to the fruit. Then you have, let's say, the peel, but then you get right away to the pulp. And even though there is a little bit of rind, if that's the word, that white, but there's very little rind, and then there's pulp. I know it's bitter. An esrog, if you ever cut open an esrog, you have to get the outermost layer of skin. And then once you go even through the yellow or greenish peel, there is a thick rind. There is a thick rind. And there's very little pulp inside the esrog. The Mishnah here, speaking about niklav, about peeled, we're speaking about the outermost layer. That even though it's only the outermost layer, and more about this in the Gemara, then the esrog is invalid. Nizdak means that it's split. Now this is very important. Split is only going to invalidate the esrog. Split means nothing is lacking physically, but the majority of the thickness of the esrog was split open. That means the split doesn't only go through the outer peel, it goes through the majority of the rind. It goes into it. The pulp, because the pulp in many esrogim, unlike the picture here, it's nistak berubai, as we'll see again, every case will be further expounded in the Gemara. It's like it's chassid, even though physically nothing is missing. Now the next statement, nikav, and here the big machloikis, whether there is a vav, whether there's not a vav. Rashi clearly is goyres the vav. If there is a hole, there's a perforation, and some of it is missing. If a person stuck a needle into the esrog, but nothing was removed, according to Rashi's version, it's not going to be a problem. But if there is a little perforation, but when you stuck the needle in, it actually removed some of the fruit, some of any part of the esrog, that's called deficient, then it's going to be invalidated. Now, other Rishonim, the ones who have the girsa, that not a vav, it's like another case. That just a hole, even if nothing is missing, is problematic, but that's when it's a nekev mefulash. If the hole goes through and through, even if nothing is missing, it's like the nizdak and it's a problem. And then with the vav, and then if something is missing, it's also a problem. Next case. Also, chazaz is al meyutay. Now, in contrast, if the taka has boils, but the boils do not cover the majority of the circumference of the periphery of the esrog, only the minority, or if, yes, not the pitim is missing, but on the opposite side of the pitim, the part of the fruit that is connected to the branch, to the tree, that is called the oikates, the stem. If the stem was removed, stem is not considered the fruit. Or if nikev, let's go with Girsas Rashi, v'loy chasar kolshu, there is a hole, not a nekev mefulish, just a hole, and the hole did not take anything out. Here it's kosher. Now, other dinim, esrog hakushi. Rashi says an esrog that comes from Ethiopia, an esrog that comes with has a darkish tinge. People are unaccustomed with this darkened looking esrog, And therefore, since you're not accustomed to it, it's not called hadar. I'm emphasizing that because if you would live in Ethiopia, and that will be the esregim that you are familiar with, here will be another case where beauty is subjective, then it will not be lacking in hiddur. But in our Mishnah in Eretz Yisrael, an esreg hakushi is possible. What about an esreg that is very green, not our green esregim? It's green like a leek, very green. We had this above. Here machlokes. Rav Meir says it's kosher. Rabbi Yehuda says it's possible. And as the Gemara explained, it's either a machlokes, whether it's hadar or not, or when the Gemara was emphasizing that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't even need hadar by an esreg. Why is Rabbi Yehuda paisel? Because the color indicates that it's underdeveloped. Not like in the picture here. It's much greener. That is not mature. That's a problem. It's not an esreg yet. Similarly, shiur, esreg, hakotan, what's the smallest size of the esreg? Rav Meir says it has to be at least the size of an egois of a walnut. Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be at least the size of a beitza. Here again, the Gemara said above, either hidur versus non-hidur, or if it's that little, if it's not the size of a beitza, Rabbi Yehuda sees this to be an underdeveloped fruit, and that's why it's possible. Now, what's the maximum size? The final din in the Mishnah. So here again, a machlokes. Ubi gadol. So Rabbi Yehuda holds kadei sheyoicha shnayim biyodei. Divided Rabbi Yehuda. It has to be not that big. You should at least be able to hold two in one hand. And Rabbi Yossi says there's no maximum size. And the example that he gave was afilu echad b'shtei yodav. Even if you need both of your hands to hold one, it's still good. 2 points. Point number one, just going back into the Gemara. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say it has to be kadei sheyoicha shnayim biyodei? Either it's a din in hidur, or as we learned, it's a practical thing. Because if you'll have to change, if the esrog is going to be too big, then when you exchange hands, of Rabbi Yossi, the source of the Bahag, or the Bahag, it fits with what we learned in the Bahag. Because if we're going to go like the Rabbeinu Tam, that you, even though you don't have to bundle it, you have to hold all four together at the same time, then how can he say that if the esrog is so big that you where are you going to hold the other species? According to Rabbi Yossi, according to the Bahag, it fits. You don't have to hold it all together at the same time. It has to be in front of you. You have to eventually pick up all four. If not, it's ma'akev, but you can hold each one at a time. So indeed, if you need to have both of your hands holding the esrog, you're good to go.